Hey everyone, today I just wanted to do a video about more of a real world scenario, something that I get asked from time to time and poses a little bit of a challenge. So the scenario is this. You've got a physical server or a bunch of physical servers on premise, but no available resources, no spare servers or hypervisors or anything like that to deploy your migration appliance. Similarly, you can have the same sort of situation if you're in maybe a data center that you don't control, you're not able to deploy anything more in there, or maybe you don't have access, or they're not going to give you access to the firewalls, and you don't have, you just don't have a way to follow the normal architecture. And we're going to look at how to get around that with Azure Migrate. So let's get into it. I'll show you the lab environment, and hopefully what I'm talking about just becomes a little bit more clear. Okay, so here we are in my Azure environment. I've set up hopefully something that resembles something that you might already have in your target Azure zone, or an architecture that you may start with if you don't have anything. It's basically, well, it is a hub and spoke topology, just a very small and basic one. So I've got this hub network here, of which there's never going to be any machines that live in here, just stuff for connectivity. And then paired to that network, we've got the two spoke networks, and I've got a spoke for the Migrate appliance. And eventually when we're done with our migration project, I'll probably delete that. And I've got the first spoke for production workloads, and I've just called it LZ for landing zone. And so typically you'd have several spokes, maybe one for identity and so on and so forth, but I don't need all that for this demo. And if I jump over to those spokes, sorry, I'm going into the pairing there, but if I jump over to those spokes, then you'll just see that that's got one pairing just back to the hub and not to each other. So it's very simple. In the hub, I've also got a few subnets here. So I've got an Azure Firewall subnet, and I do have an Azure Firewall deployed in there. So we've got security, we've got a security appliance for our virtual machines. And then I've got a few other things. So I've got Azure Bastion deployed, so we can remote onto the machines. And I've also got probably the most interesting thing in this architecture here is I've got a gateway subnet. And what we're going to do is we're going to deploy an Azure Migrate appliance into Azure, which is not what you'd usually do. You'd usually put the Azure Migrate appliance on premise beside the workloads that you want to migrate. So it's a little bit different. You might be thinking, or maybe you're not thinking, but that's going to then traverse through the firewall. So we're going to need to open some firewall ports, which is almost correct, or possibly correct, depending on how you're routing your traffic. But the Migrate appliance doesn't support NAT, or it can't sit behind a NAT. So you can't use the public IP address of the firewall to set up your replication. You can register the source machine through those open ports, but it just won't replicate. It gets stuck at 0. So what we're going to do to get around that is we're going to deploy into our hub, or I've already deployed, so you don't have to wait and watch me. I've deployed, if I go to connected devices here, hopefully it will show you. I've deployed a VPN gateway into that gateway subnet, obviously. And that opens up two options for our scenarios. One is we could set up a site-to-site VPN if we do have access to the firewall, and that's preferred. But in my scenario today, I'm going to go with the terrible scenario. I've got a Windows Server 2012 R2 box. I don't have privilege on the firewall. So what I'm going to do is set up a site-to-site VPN from the machine that we're actually migrating. So that's basically it. Let's get into actually deploying some stuff. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is deploy an actual appliance that I'm going to use to do the replication. And I've created pre-prepared a resource group here that I'm going to dump it in. I'm not going to put it with all my other resources because this resource is going to be deleted at different time than the other resources. So it's going to live in its own resource group. I'll just speed this up so you don't have to watch me deploy the machine, but I'm going to deploy a Windows Server 2016 box. It must be 2016 for replication. The Discovery appliance is different. The Discovery appliance is recommended on 2022. But for replication, we need a 2016 machine. I'll just speed this along and get this done. Cool. Okay, so our deployment's complete. I'm just going to jump over to that resource group. Here's our virtual machine here, and I'm just going to validate that the networking's all working, our Azure Bastion connectivity is all working, and I'll quickly point out to you the ports that have opened. And I've done this ahead of time, and it might not match up for you exactly how you've got your network configured, so that's why I didn't bother to show you the specifics of my lab, but I just want you to see. What I've got open here is, okay, the first one's I'm allowing Azure Bastion so I can remote on. But with regards to our migration activities, I've got port 443 open for the registration and communication between the two devices, and port 9443 open for the actual replication. And then I've got port 445, which isn't actually required for Azure Migrate, but I'm just going to use SMB so that I can transfer some files between the boxes. Let's just jump onto the VM and make sure we can connect, and then we'll move on with Azure Migrate. Awesome. It looks like a good sign. I think we're signing in, no problem there. Cool. Okay, we're on the appliance. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to log into the Azure portal from the appliance itself, because the appliance is going to need some software. So I'm going to, for you, it'll be like a window in a window. So bear with me. I'll speed this along as well. And once we're in the Azure portal, I'll pick it up from there. Cool. Okay. So here we are in the Azure portal. Let's jump over to Azure Migrate, and I just wanted to show you very quickly the documentation, more or less, that we're following here. I'll put the links for the documentation in the show notes, but I'll very, very quickly go through what I'm going to do essentially. So, as I laid out the scenario at the start, whether it be that you're in a data center with very little control or physical servers, still the process that we're following is going to be the migrate machines as physical servers to Azure. It's applicable also to Citrix devices because they're not supported natively by Azure Migrate, but you can still get them across if you use this methodology. I'm not going to read it out to you verbatim, but if I scroll on down, you'll see that we're basically going to go to the migrate section of Azure Migrate and follow the wizard, more or less. But then after you've installed the appliance, it jumps around a little bit here. We need to install the mobility agent. The mobility agent in our scenario is Windows, so we're gonna end up jumping over to there, and then I'm gonna grab all these commands, and I'll do that on these commands. Will go on the source server that we're protecting or migrating. So you'll see that over there. But I just wanted to show you. There's a few bits to this, and there's one other piece, which is the passphrase or passphrase generation, potentially, if you don't catch it, which is on a completely different page altogether. I'll put all 3 pages in the show notes. So that's that. Just wanted to point that out. Let's jump into it. So jump back into the server here. We're in Azure Migrate. So let's go to servers, databases, and web apps and create a migration project. Let's create a new project. So we'll go RG migrate project. Australia, we're going to base it in. Okay, and Australia is going to be our target. Cool, good to go. Cool. Okay, our project's deployed. Now, this is the part where I think it can possibly get confusing. We need to discover our server to get it in our project to migrate it. But in our case, I'm not going to go through the discovery, and I want you to be aware that the discovery part is a totally separate appliance or piece of software that gives you information about the servers you're trying to run, whether they're ready to migrate, whether they have dependencies, and whether traffic goes to other servers, so that you can plan your migration, particularly useful in bigger migrations. In our case, we're migrating one single server. I know that it's ready to migrate. So the discover that I'm going to do is actually under migration tools, and that's going to help us or step us through deploying the migration appliance, and then we'll be able to replicate. So jump down here to discover under migration tools, hit that. We're going to migrate to Azure virtual machines, and we're going to migrate from physical infrastructure in theory. We're going to confirm that we're going to Australia East, and let's get that created. Cool, okay, and then the type of appliance that we want is a replication appliance. So let's do that. Now let's download the software, the installer. And that's downloading, cool. And then we'll also hit this download button. I don't know why they make the software so small and then this download button a bit bigger, because we need both. Hit that, and that's going to download for us the registration security key, so we can register our appliance to this project, and that's probably already downloaded, but I'm just going to have to wait, and I'll speed this up in the edit so you don't have to wait with me. Cool, okay, and our download's done. And I could actually just leave that screen now in the background because I am going to have to come back to it, but I need it to reload. So don't get too worried if you navigate away from that screen. Let's just get the migration appliance installed. Now, if you've read the documentation ahead of time or you've done this before, you might have noticed when I deployed the server 2016 server that I underspec'd it. The recommended specs for the migration server, are there to support 20 or 100 migrations or however many it is at a time. So during this installation, we're going to see some warnings. Hopefully we don't get any criticals, but if we just get some warnings, I'm just going to carry on and not worry about them too much. Find our, if that wants to open, find our registration key that we downloaded. That will register us to the project that we've created. The rest of it's really just next, finished, as well as setting up a root password for the SQL database. So again, I'll just speed this along and I'll catch you at the end. This takes a wee while to complete. For this point, if you did have a separate data disk, then you just change the installation path here. It installs the agents and a whole bunch of stuff in there, but I believe also within these paths, it uses it to cache data as it passes it on to the storage account. For our purposes, I'm just going to go leave it in its default location. I don't have another disk anyways. I've only got one network card, so I'm just going to go ahead and select that and leave the default port of port 9443. Okay, and I'll speed this piece along. Okay, that took about 20 minutes or so, but it's now finished. So let's just finish off that. Finish off the installer. Now, grab this passphrase and put it into a clipboard. Otherwise, you'll need to go and manually regenerate or generate the passphrase from the command line. So make sure to copy this to the clipboard. Let's do that now. And what I'll do is I'll just save that before we go any further into a notepad. If it wants to run a notepad for me. Cool, just paste it in there. I'm going to save that as passphrase.txt, so that's easy to identify. So let's save that into our, let's make a temp folder. Oh, there's already a temp folder. Cool. Okay. Now it brings you up to this configuration for the Azure for the Migrate appliance. So let's add an account. I'm just going to add the credentials of the server that we're planning to migrate. This might be, in our case, it's local credentials. Potentially for you, it might be domain credentials. Just give it a friendly name. I'm just going to call it the prod server. That's the name of the server that we're migrating because it does everything production in this imaginary scenario. Cool. Okay, so that's pretty much everything for our appliance. What I'm going to do then is go back to the Azure portal, and this is the screen we left off from before that I said, you can pretty much leave it because the configuration server is still grayed out. So what I'm going to do is I could just refresh the page maybe, or go back and basically start again from the Discover. So I'm back in Azure Migrate, go to Discover, repeat all the same stuff that we already did. So Azure VM, physical servers are what we're migrating, replication appliance, and like magic, our Migrate appliance is now available in the drop-down list. And finalize the registration. You have to do this, otherwise you can't move on to the next step in creating a replication job. Whilst that happens, we can pretty much move on. But there's one more thing that I want to do on this server, and that is copy some files. So if we go back to our documentation, okay, and we're just going to look for the file location of the mobility service. So if you just search for locate installer files, then you can find it here. It's in the program data folder. Just grab that whole path, and I'm just going to jump back into the migration appliance and cut to that location. because we're on a Windows machine, it's obvious that the one that actually has an icon is the application that we want. So just copy that, and I'm going to chuck that. I've already done it, but I'll just show you where I've put it. So in ctemp, now that we've installed everything, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So I created a subfolder called Azure Migrate to store the files that we want, and I've chucked in exactly that same file. So that's the mobility client, and I moved the passphrase in there too, so it'll make things easier for us when we move over to the other server. That's everything we need now from the appliance. So let's jump over to the source server, and we'll register the source server against the migration appliance, and then we can set up our replication job. Okay, here we are over on the server that we want to migrate. I just want to show you a few things about the server before we actually set up the migration job. It is a Windows Server 2012 R2 server, so it's awful. Ideally, we wouldn't still be on this, but the server is our prod server, and it's running everything prod, and we can't get off it, so we're going to have to migrate it. We're in a data center where we have no control over the network, and we can't deploy an appliance locally. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect this server directly to our Azure network using a point-to-site VPN on the server that we're planning to migrate. So I've actually already set up the VPN on this server to the gateway that I showed you earlier. So let's go ahead and connect to that VPN. And there we are, we're connected. Amazing. And one other thing before I move on is on Server 2012, ideally you want to be running PowerShell version 5.1. So I've upgraded to 5.1 if you're not on 5.1. So if you check this PS version table and you're on 4, for example, go search for Windows Management Framework 5.1 and upgrade to that version, which will upgrade your PowerShell. That being said, let's just check our network connectivity through to the Azure Migrate appliance. And if this wants to tab complete, it won't do because I've typed it wrong. There we go, testnet connection. To 10.210.1.4 is the IP of our migration appliance, and I want to check on port 9443, which is our replication port. I've got the same rules set up for 443 and 445 as well. So if this particular test works, then we know that we've got connectivity flow. And there we are, TCP test succeeded. So I think we're more or less good to go. What I want to do is, of course, I've got the documentation page open in my other machine. So let me just grab that link and I'll bring it up onto the server so it's easier for us to follow. Let's bring it into here. So what we want to do is get the files from the other server. So we'll start with that. It's going to UNC to our migration appliance. There it is there. And go into temp, and we put our stuff in Azure Migrate and grab both those files and bring them back to our local temp directory. And you can see the certificates there that I used to set up the site-to-site VPN. I'm just going to copy over those couple of files there. And whilst that copies, let's collect up these commands. And I've actually already collected them into a notepad. So on the desktop, I've already got this notepad here where I've got these commands. We want to edit the registration command, which is the last one. So what we do is in the CS endpoint, that's going to be the IP address of our migration appliance, and then we just need to provide a path to the passphrase.txt file that we've just copied over, and that's that. So let's copy these commands now and run them. I should point out that these commands are better run in a command prompt just because they don't have the // in front of the path. So what we're going to do is open an admin command prompt and just paste that in there. Magic, we're in the extracted file, and you can see that we've extracted a whole bunch of files from our installer.exe. The next thing is we're in the right directory, so we're just going to run this command, and that will install the agent for us. Cool, that looks like it's doing its thing. This typically takes like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. So I'm just gonna pause the recording there and come back when it's done. Cool, okay, that migration's complete. So the final step for us now is to register the appliance against Azure Migrate. So let's change into the directory where the agent's installed. Paste that in there. There we are. Grab this command that yep, okay, I have edited it, looks good. Paste that in there. The registration generally is more or less instant. If you find it hanging, you've got a problem, whether it's connectivity or there's something wrong with the password file. But we're good. Everything's running. So let's jump back to Azure Migrate, where our discovered server will appear. So back in there, and what we'll find is that there's actually nothing there yet. There we are. So we've got no discovered servers. Don't worry about that. If the registration showed that it was successful, then it's going to show up. Just be a bit patient. Sometimes it takes 5, sometimes 10 minutes. And I'm just going to keep clicking refresh here. But I'm going to pause the video there. And once I've probably refreshed like 10 times, I'll be back once the server's shown up. Okay, so that only took about 5 minutes and my servers showed up here as a discovered server in Azure Migrate. So let's set up the replication job. Just jump into replicate. Actually, I'm just going to do one more thing before that. I'm going to pre-prepare the target resource group of where I want it to land. So let's do that. Oh, I've already done it. To prepared. So we've got a resource group here called RG prod server. You'll see why when I set up the replication job. So let's jump back to Azure Migrate. Cool, set up a replication job. The type of replication job that we're going to want to set up is servers and virtual machines to Azure VM. Apologies, my browser's going so slow today. So we want to migrate from physical machines, select the appliance that we've set up. It wants to do it. There we are. And we're going to use the credential. We've only got one set of credentials that we actually set up on the appliance. So if you have domain credentials or other credentials as well, you just choose from the drop-down list. Go next. We haven't done any assessments because we only installed the migration appliance. So we'll just choose our settings manually. And here's our discovered servers. So let's tick that box, prod server. That's what we want to migrate. And here we go with choose a resource group where it wants to land. Strangely, it doesn't let us create a new resource group here like every other wizard that you follow in Azure where it does. This one doesn't, so we've pre-prepared our resource group. That's where we want it to go. No SQL in that box, so let's untick that. I don't have a hybrid license for this. I'm going to let it auto create the storage. I'm going to choose the network, so I want it to go into my landing zone. And our landing zone subnet, and I think that's more or less good to go there. I'm just going to, in this instance, I'm just going to let it auto select the size, but you might want to select a specific SKU size. And for disks, I'm going to choose standard SSD because HDD is horrible. So I'm going to go with at least the SSD. And that's it. So let's start the replication job, and whilst that deploys, I'll just point out a couple of things that I'm going to monitor, because sometimes these jobs say that they're deployed and the deployment is the replication job is successful, but the replication job sits on 0% replication forevermore and it never works. So you've got some sort of problem. So what I'm going to just monitor, and this is not a fix, but how I'm going to know that it started is on the migration appliance or on the server. If I just crack open Task Manager, and perhaps if I want to be more specific, the Resource Monitor, and looking at performance, then the Ethernet here is obviously, okay, this is about normal. There's not much going on this machine. It takes typically about 15 minutes for the job to actually start migrating. And then you'll suddenly see a big throughput of data. The other thing that I can see is if I get a little bit more detailed, if I go to network here, then I go to TCP connections, and maybe I'll just sort this by port. I should see a bunch of connections on port 443 and 9443 to my source server, which is 172.16, the IP address that it's got on the VPN. So I can't see any of that going on here. Scroll down a bit. No, nothing yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause the recording here and wait for it to happen, because like I said, sometimes it takes about 10 to 15 minutes before I see some actual action going on. Okay, cool. So that took, about 10 minutes. After 3 or 4 minutes, I saw a lot of connections, but not much traffic. But now I'm starting to see a lot of traffic. So you can see here, I've got on the appliance, if I go down to port 9443, I've got a bunch of connections, which is the replication port. So I've got a bunch of connections to the source server, and similarly, if I jump over to the source server, a bunch of connections on port 9443 to the appliance, right? And my network throughput has jumped up to about 250 megabits, give or take, which is the maximum throughput that I can achieve on the particular SKU VPN that I chose. So for me, the migration, it's rapid. It's going pretty quick. If I had a bigger VPN SKU, it would be going faster. And then if we jump back to Azure Migrate, I'll show you where you can keep an eye on the progress. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll do that. I'll do it on the browser in the server, because my browser is going so slow. Here we go. So let's jump back into Azure Migrate and go to, okay, it's not going to let me. There we go. Go to Overview. I don't know why it was grayed out just before. So under Migration Tools, let's go to Overview, go to Replications, and we'll see the replication that we've got running. Here we are, and it's 0% synchronized, and sometimes if there's a problem, you're looking at it, it says healthy and it's 0% synchronized for ages, which is why I checked to see the bandwidth pumping through. So if we give that another 10, 11 more minutes, it might say 1%, and then I'm like, okay, great, data's transferring. So we're going to let that run. We obviously need it to get up to 100%, and once it's at 100%, then we can do an actual migration. So we'll I'll pause the video there. I'll let the migration happen. I'm going to go have a beer and dinner at the pub, and come back later on tonight or maybe tomorrow morning, and we'll do the actual cutover migration and validate that we have internet connectivity and that the migration's complete. Awesome. I'll catch you then. Okay, I'm back. It's actually the next morning, but we're ready to cut over our machine. You can see here in our replication that the migrate button is lit up, if you will. So it means the migration, the replication is complete. We're all in sync. I think somewhere here it'll say last sync time. Oh, here we go, last synchronized. And that's just a few minutes, just 4 minutes ago. So let's just get into it. We'll do the migration. Follow this through, shut down the machines before migration to minimize data loss. Sure, let's choose. Oh, it's not actually going to let us choose yes. Interestingly, I have chosen yes before, and sometimes find that the source machine doesn't actually shut down. So if you are able to and you choose yes, make sure you double check on your source machine. And there we go, migration's in progress. So I'll just pause the video here and we'll speed it along so you don't have to watch this thing. And once the migration is complete, we'll log on to what is now going to be the target server. Okay, that didn't take very long. It only took maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It says the migration is complete, so let's see how we've got on. Just going to jump across to the resource group, so RG prod server resource group that we made. And there we go. Okay, so it looks like it's created all the resources that we need for the server to run. Let's jump into the virtual machine. And it says the agent's not ready for use, but the server is running. So because I'm impatient, I'm just going to try and connect. The VM agent should be on there. It gets installed as part of the mobility agent, or the replication agent installs the Azure VM agent. So let's just give connecting a go via Azure Bastion. And on that machine, we were just administrator. Okay, that's looking pretty promising. And there we are on our 2012 box, all spun up in Azure. And I just want to validate that we've got inbound connection via our Azure Bastion. I just want to make sure that we've got outbound connection, which it looks like we do. Everything's looking pretty good. And you can see that the IP address we're getting on that machine is 2042.203.146. And if I jump back to our Azure infrastructure, we can see, if I go into the hub network there, that the public IP address that I've got attached to the firewall should match up with that. Of course, that's the private IP. So let's go to public IP configuration. There you go, 2042.203.146. So that validates that we're routing our traffic out through our Azure firewall. So that's it for migrating a physical machine to Azure. Thanks for sticking with me. It's quite a long video. If you've got any other real world type in the wild Azure scenarios that you want me to try and cover off, then let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks very much. I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.